You're now listening to the Diversity Roundtable. I'm Pamela Xaba, entrepreneur, inclusion enthusiast, and the founder of Nonkosi Creatives with over 2 decades as a corporate HR professional. My goal is to give you insights into conversations with entrepreneurs and corporate professionals who have insightful stories of triumph and leadership. I uncover my personal journey from cultivating diversity and promoting inclusive communities. We'll also find out why building a prosperous society is vital for leadership roles. Subscribe and get ready to rise, lead, and help define the spirit of South African excellence.
Hey everyone, Marlinie here, Franklin CVY, South Africa. We develop exceptional leaders at every level. We build personal and interpersonal skills. We create high-trust cultures, and we provide powerful execution frameworks. So come learn why other Fortune 500 companies vote us, Franklin CVY, the most trusted leadership company in the world.
Good day. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for tuning in. I am your host, Pamela Xaba, for the Diversity Roundtable. Today we are on episode 14. We have come a long way since September 2023 when we did our first episode. So before I introduce our guest today, it is still my birthday month. I'm still very excited. I'm still feeling very blessed. But on episode 13, the previous episode that we recorded with Busisiwe Hlajwayo, where she covered the topic Black Women in the Workplace, it was really an enlightening and a soul-searching, introspective episode. So hence then the follow-up of that, I've got the most wonderful, most inspiring and courageous ladies in studio today. I'm actually bragging because I can feel that I am basking in leadership royalty. You don't understand how I'm feeling right now. So I've got and Pratt, and I also have Marlinie Ramsamy. So Marlinie Ramsamy is the CEO of Franklin CVY South Africa. We will hear more from her in terms of her journey, what led her to start Franklin CVY South Africa. And then we also have the amazing, the inspiring, the beautiful Anne Pratt, all the way from the US. So don't be mistaken, though. She is a South African through and through. And I think when I started engaging with her a couple of weeks ago, actually, to my surprise, that she's got a background from KZN, KwaZulu-Natal. So she's also a Zulu girl. She speaks Zulu, and I was really pleasantly surprised from KZN, South Africa, all the way to Harvard University. So let me not steal the thunder. So let me hand over to Anne first to actually then first tell us about who you are, Anne. I don't want to go into a full-on bio and introduce you because then I might trip over myself. I think my listeners and the people who view this podcast, they understand how authentic, we are. And though sometimes we don't even use titles then to read people's bios, we want actually for them to have that element of surprise. And so I think I've given them, hints here and there that you are from KZN, South Africa, to the US, and I've mentioned Harvard. I think let's leave it at that. But what they are going to get today is inspiration from a leadership perspective, it's inspiration from a courage perspective, and faith. Most importantly, faith. And then what has been your journey of faith for you to get to this point? We've got a lot of young professionals that follow this podcast. We've got entrepreneurs that follow this podcast, but we also have people from previously disadvantaged communities that also follow this podcast. So for us to have the 2 beautiful ladies in studio today is indeed an inspiration. So let me stop before I say too much and hand over to you. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for putting together this podcast and messaging to up-and-coming young professionals. I think it's so important that we remind our generation about leadership, but we also empower and inspire the next. To your question, as you mentioned, I'm a Zulu girl. I grew up in KwaZulu-Natal. I'm an African at heart. Today I'm an author, I'm an executive coach, I'm a keynote speaker, and I also help corporations and organizations innovate, adapt, and transform. But just very briefly, I from university, well, actually, let me go back a step. But I grew up in an anti-apartheid activist family. My late mother was quite the pioneer and taught at King Edward Hospital for many years, and also RK Khan Hospital in Chatsworth, where she really helped transform the perceptions and standards of what was then segregated Black medical education. But I'm degreed in economics and psychology, a master's in business, and went into the business world. So I'm a businesswoman. I love business. I think business has a very powerful role to play in transforming societies. And I grew up in Unilever at the University of Life. So from university, I went to Unilever. I'm a consumer brand marketer by background. I spent time in McCann Retail Advertising Agency, helping turn that around in my late 20s. And then I became a marketing executive. I sat on the management board of a subsidiary of an Altron-listed company, and then went into my calling, which is really leadership. So I was managing director of Woodburn Management Selection, owned by Whitehead Mann, listed on the London Stock Exchange, and then founded our own executive search firm, Mandelas Pratt and Associates, which we tied up internationally with one of the 10th biggest search firms worldwide, and became one of the pioneering executive search firms in South Africa, working across the African continent and working internationally, but also really committed to helping Mandela's vision for South Africa succeed. And from there, after meeting Mandela and getting a personal call to action, which fueled my purpose and faith to come to Harvard and create this leadership model for the world, the Mandela Leadership Blueprint. So that's a little about where I've come from and where I am now.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And, such richness and rich background, because I think someone who is actually there just listening to you talking about your background, I think what piques my curiosity and what I'd really, really love to hear more about as well, just for the benefit of our viewers, is really the Global Mandela Leadership Movement for Change, right? So can you give us more details what that entails, and then also give us some of your personal experiences, because I think it's very important, for our listeners to get some of the nuggets of this story. What is this Global Mandela Leadership Movement for Change all about? And how big is it? What has happened? Yeah.
No, thank you, Pam. So let me take one step back. I've been passionate about leadership as a young child, and growing up in an anti-apartheid activist family and living through the turbulence and troubled times in South Africa, but living through that experience of how Mandela transformed himself and changed a nation from a brutal autocracy into a modern, stable democracy, and how he galvanized the world. And I think, as a young child, I prayed for the day he would be released and I would meet him, and that dream came true. And I think, not only in South Africa today, we look at the world, we are dealing with a pivotal global moment. It's a twin pillar moment of despair and hope. And if I look at the big existential threats that are challenging nations around the world, it requires a radical new way to think, act, and lead. And I think that people globally in South Africa, I'm still in regular contact with dear family and friends in the country, but also in the United States, and the Middle East and Eastern Europe. I mean, we can go on and on. We really have a leadership crisis. And a whole lot of us really feel very strongly about wanting to transform the leadership crisis worldwide, wanting to remind our generation, just remind us of what great leadership looks like and how do we exercise leadership that is impactful and makes a difference, and wanting to empower and inspire the next generation.
Absolutely.
And I think what really strikes me from my consumer marketing strategic background, and I specialized in strategy in my MBA. If I look at leadership, Pam, whether it be in South Africa or in other parts of the world, we always start with strategic context and strategic priorities. What are the big strategic issues? And from that perspective, what kind of leader can meet this moment and rise to those challenges and deliver and fulfill the mandate that they've been given. And of course, we know South Africa has got elections coming up soon.
Yep.
So, it's a pivotal election. What kind of leaders need to be elected to deal with the biggest strategic issues facing the country at this moment in time? So that's why leadership. But let me move on to the other part of your question around the movement.
Yeah.
Coming to Harvard, it really was about learning to how do we scale up so we create global, social, sustainable impact. And Harvard has been such a gift to me, and it's opened up the world because the world comes to Harvard. And it's been such a blessing and a gift to take my experience in South Africa, not only as a young child living through change, but also running one of the top executive search companies in the country and on the continent, and then combining that with the latest thought leadership and thinking at Harvard. So being able to blend all of that, we then said, this is a recipe. I said, this is a recipe that can really galvanize the world. And the movement, in fact, to be candid with you, it was January 6th, the storming of the US Capitol, that truly shocked me. I arrived at Harvard 2 days before President Trump's inauguration. I knew there was a whole new kind of movement in the United States. And then when I saw the storming of the Capitol on January the 6th, it just shocked me, the extent of the discontent, the deep divides. And that week, we launched this movement. So the movement is a global Mandela leadership movement for change. Currently it has 3 legs to it. I host my own video podcast called Leading Boldly into the Future.
Yes.
And on that podcast, I have already interviewed but published 55 so far, global courageous champions of change, people from around the world. We all have a common purpose to transform the leadership crisis. Our golden thread, we all have a Mandela moment. We've all been touched in some way by Mandela, by Madiba, and that has shaped the way we think, act, and lead in the world today. And our common clue is something I learned growing up in South Africa. It's Ubuntu. It's the cultural and spiritual philosophy that helps us understand that it truly is the interconnectedness of our humanity that will help humanity meet these big, big, big challenges and not only survive but thrive. So that's what binds us as a movement. We have the video podcast. I'm authoring a book called Mandelas Leadership Blueprint and what the world needs now. There's a book, there's a workbook, and then we're also going to put together 10 masterclasses which will go online, teaching different aspects of Mandela's Leadership Blueprint, and I will do that with some of our amazing co-founders. And then we have a package which we're putting into higher ed universities and colleges across the United States, across Africa and the rest of the world. And we've already got 5 top colleges and universities, a top business school in Ireland, top universities and business schools in South Africa, have universities in the United States. So already conceptually, and the people who are part of this movement, these people who really care about, the future of leadership and leading bold into the future. And just to mention some of those names, I mean, the former Judge Mervyn King from South Africa, who was a great mentor of mine, captains of military in the country, Yolanda Cuba, Terry Pimi. I mean, there are many, many captains of industry, judges, and then ex-South Africans that live abroad. We have Lord Peter Haynes, who serves the United Kingdom in the Parliament, in the House of Lords. We have former Vice-Chancellor of Cambridge University in England, Sir Alec Brewers. We have presidents of universities in the United States, United World College to Utah Valley University. We have the Deputy Dean of Education from Stanford University.
Wow.
I really could go on, but we have many leaders, by the way, across the African continent, from Zimbabwe, from Kenya, from Uganda, but anyway, that gives you a flavor. And these are, and actually people in the Middle East. We have a Palestinian liberation fighter. We have Jewish ambassadors. I mean, these are people who really care about transforming the leadership crisis and making this world a better place for all.
It is a global movement, indeed. It is a global movement. I think to our listeners, that's why I said I am like really basking in leadership royalty here. I mean, just the information and the type of inspiring work that Anne is involved in, it's just really, really, truly amazing. And we are just really so blessed to have you, Anne, as one of our guests today. But I think just hold that thought, because I think it's going to get even more and more interesting as we take a deep dive into this discussion. But let me go over to you, Marlinie Ramsamy, our viewers. She is the CEO of Franklin CVY South Africa, as I mentioned earlier. So over to you, my lady. Introduce yourself, who you are, where you've been, what you have done, and then we'll continue to engage with both you and Anne. So over to you.
Thank you so much for that, Pam. And wow, what a privilege to be here. I mean, we're calling this the Diversity Roundtable, right?
Yeah.
And talk about diverse.
Yeah.
Such an amazing opportunity to be here in the presence of such lovely thinkers. I mean, just to be with Anne and to listen to her, it's just amazing. So thank you for that opportunity. I myself, very much a humble township girl myself, grew up in the humble township of Phoenix, KwaZulu-Natal.
So I brought all my Zulu girls here, right?
And, I get goosebumps thinking about my journey. I grew up in a home where my dad never saw the inside of a classroom, totally uneducated. The day that I got my matric results, my dad was in India on he was on a tourist trip. I called him and I said, Dad, I passed, and I had a bursary, and he said, you will not take the bursary. My blood, sweat, and tears will pay for you to have an education.
Wow.
I subsequently became the first person in our family to be degreed.
Wow.
I am degreed in education, so I'm a teacher at heart. I majored in drama and English. My second degree is in psychology, sociology. I have a specific interest in cognitive neuropsychology. And from all of that, to now being the CEO of one of the biggest global brands. It remains the top 20 leadership development brands in the world.
Yeah.
And what I remember, and why this is so pivotal, this conversation, and what Anne is sharing, is when I was relatively new to the Covey family, I had the privilege of having Stephen R. Covey, the late Stephen Covey, arrive in South Africa, and one of the purposes of his visit was to meet with Nelson Mandela. And we met out there in their home in Houghton, together with the media, and it was the most phenomenal experience to have both Nelson Mandela and Stephen R. Covey in the same space, and we stood around in a circle. And there was I, this meek and mild, thinking that it's meek and mild, and realizing that, well, if you want to lead in this space,
Yeah.
you got to do it fearlessly,
Uh-huh.
knowing very well that all of that which you are listening to in that moment
Yeah.
needs to be expanded
Yeah.
to every single individual. Because if you hold it, it becomes really selfish, right?
Yep.
So that's where the journey of, well, how do I expand the work of Franklin CVY comes in. I started my Tolwyn consulting business in 2004. And 20 years later, now, having the Franklin CVY brand behind me, I'm really excited about all of the partnerships that it is. And of course, the synergy that exists between Anne Pratt's work and the Mandela leadership qualities, as well as all of those deep-rooted principles that is anchored in the CVY work.
Yeah.
So there's just so much of synergy and excitement that I can see as we're having these conversations. So that's to answer your short question in a very long way.
No, thank you so much. I think that also really resonates with me. And I'm just really, it's amazing how the universe conspires, or aligns when your heart is in the right place. Because the story that you are sharing now with Mandela and the late Stephen Covey as well, and what Anne has shared, and I didn't know, people won't even believe this, that I didn't know that there was a connection between the two of you ladies. Because actually, maybe for the benefit of our viewers, how it happened is that then I got to interact again. I keep on saying in all of my podcast episode recordings, and is that the power of social media is so amazing. So I think I started chatting to you about a few weeks ago. And listening to you, I thought, look, I've just signed a partnership with Franklin CVY with Marlinie, and how about we do this episode, but really without any context in terms of how your journeys are sort of like similar from a leadership perspective. So I think really, indeed, it is truly a blessing. I think coming back to you, and you did mention earlier that we are obviously approaching our elections in South Africa. And, what we are talking about, you do have a podcast channel as well with the title Leading Boldly into the Future, which is what we then leveraging on for this podcast episode as well. So in our South African context, there's a lot happening globally, but then in our South African context, with the elections coming up, how do we then show up in the context of leading boldly into the future? And how does the future look like for you, just for the benefit of our listeners and viewers?
Well, Pam, I don't know if this is nature or nurture. I don't know if this is a function of, my DNA and how I was born or how I was raised, or maybe a combination of both. I'm an optimist by nature, but I'm also a pragmatist. I think to the second part of your question, how does the future look to me? I feel optimistic about the future. I spend a lot of time talking to younger people. In fact, some of this Mandela leadership work, I've worked with the Harvard men's basketball team, not officially under Harvard, but unofficially coach in the team. And I talk to a lot of young people. I've met a lot of young people. One of our co-founders does the youth polls at the Institute of Politics at Harvard Kennedy School. He wrote a book called Fight Gen Z and how they're using their fear and passion to save America. But I think that's, what I'm saying is that I have a lot of faith and hope in Gen Z, in the younger generation. And I think they are using their fear and passion to make big changes, whether it be in the USA or in South Africa. And to the second part of the question, what I would say is that, the United States is facing a very uncertain election in November 2024. I believe it's not a typical election at all around policy. I think this is a fight for ideology. And I think it's really about, do we sustain democracy in the United States, or does this country move towards an autocratic, a self-proclaimed autocratic leader. So I think there's an ideological war going on. It's very interesting having grown up in South Africa in that autocracy and then having that transformation to a democracy and being in the United States, which has really, nobody here has really understood what it's, nobody here alive today has truly understood what it's like to live under an autocracy. And I think, in a way that makes it harder for Americans because they don't, they think that, perhaps that is a better option. But when you've lived through and in an autocracy, I don't think there is that experience, that sense of reality. So I think the US is facing a pivotal election. I think South Africa is facing a pivotal election. And what I would say to South Africans, and I love South Africa dearly, it's the land of my birth. It's the land that nurtured and educated me, and gave me a fantastic career and life. And I'm eternally grateful for the experience of living in South Africa. And I think it's a beautiful country. So my thoughts around this election and what I would say to people in South Africa today is that your vote is a blessing. It's a gift, and it is a duty. And it is also one of the most powerful weapons that you individually have to create change in the country. I'm aware of some of the recent statistics. I know official unemployment rates, but unofficial unemployment rates, 50, 60% magnified amongst the youth. It shocks me. Qualified engineers of color cannot find a job. And what that says is that, and of course we know some of the other issues that are going on, but, if we want change in the world, we have to be that agent of change. It's very easy to look at politicians and say, what are you guys doing or you women doing? What haven't you done? If we want change, we have to be that agent of change. Nelson Mandela once said that when he began negotiating, he understood that he had to transform himself before he could transform a nation. He also said that change was one of the hardest things. Changing self was one of the hardest things. So what I would say to young people today, don't underestimate the power of your vote. It is your secret weapon. You have a duty to vote. You have an opportunity to vote. It was a hard-won battle to give you that right vote. And your vote really counts. People have this kind of confusion around, well, I'm just me. I'm like, well, the power of one is the power, is that agency, and using that power of one is what galvanized a liberation movement in South Africa. So what I would say is appreciate your vote, get out and vote. But what I would also say is be careful, delve deeply into the characters of the candidates that are up for election. It's very easy in times of crisis. And we see when we look at corporations and organizations going through innovation, adaptation, and change, there's an emergency. We want the quick fix. We want the so-called leader, the authority figure, to come in and technically fix the problem. But the truth is that is only a short-term solution. Who are the leaders in the country that are going to give you the long-term sustainable impact that is required to change course and create this movement of change in South Africa? Delve into the character. Listen to what people say, but delve into what people do. Is there an alignment between what people are promising and their track record around what people deliver? Because it's what they deliver that truly tells you the character of a person, their competence level, but also their character. And so get out and vote, delve into the character, look at the track record, and think not just short-term, folks. Think medium and longer term. What we've learned about change is that change is slow, change is hard, and it looks like a mighty mess in the middle. People, contrary to popular belief, do not fear change. They fear loss. So when you look at these kind of opportunities, people who are promising you the quick fix, that's not how change works. You need leaders in power who will exercise leadership and who are true to their word, who have integrity, who are transparent, who are honest, and who are able to deliver sustainable change. And just on that note, I mean, one of my dear friends who was with me at Harvard is Professor Thuli Madonsela, who was the former public protector of South Africa. You know, and you know, I mentioned Thuli, she's one of our co-founders in our Mandela Movement for Change. You know, if we look at people like Thuli and how she stood up, you know, and did the right thing and followed the rule of law, and had that bold courage and conviction despite death threats. If people listen to you know, the video podcast with Thuli, I mean, she talks about that. You know, these are the kinds of leaders in the country that can and will exercise leadership based on what is the will of the people, not what is for personal gain or personal interest.
Yeah, absolutely.
We need more bold voices. Certainly, we do. You know, we do. And thank you so much, Anne, for sharing this information, because I think there's a lot. People are saying a lot of things out there in our country, you know, at this time, and it's very easy for people to get confused which direction to take. You know, how to actually then apply their minds, because you know there's a lot of emotions that are involved as well during this time in our country. So thank you so much for that, for your words of wisdom, because then I'd also then like to switch over to Melanie, because you are in the leadership space, Melanie. So maybe let's talk about, because I recently also took a refresher on the 7 habits of highly effective people, and what that does, building on what Anne has just covered. You know, I did a lot of introspection to say, you know, what is my role? You know, how am I going to show up going forward? You know, so there's a lot of us that do podcasting out there. You know, what is my voice in this space? How am I going to make a difference really in the world, not also in our communities, in the context of, you know, what's happening in our country? So then I think coming back to you, then you are in the leadership space, you know. So talk to us about leadership, talk to us about courage, and resilience. And in your work, because obviously you interact with quite a lot of executives, you interact with corporates in corporate spaces. So this is the Diversity Roundtable, and also in the context of diversity and inclusion, which is very important, both locally and globally. So leadership, courage, and diversity, you know, what does this say to you?
Thank you so much for that, Pam. Let me add a little bit more to what Anne has started off saying, and echo some of that as well before I get into the other spaces. You know, I so agree with the idea that young people need to recognize that not voting is also a vote. So it is really important that they exercise that cross on the right block. Why? Because people don't follow great ideas or strategies. They follow credible leaders. And credible leadership is anchored in 4 cores, right? And we get this straight out of Stephen M.R. Covey's work, Leading at the Speed of Trust. And he talks about the 4 cores as being integrity, intent, which is anchored in our character. And it's not just integrity as a, you know, oh, this is a nice word to throw around. Fearless leaders exercise that in congruency. Integrity is about congruency of thought, actions, and words. Intent is the second piece around our the cause of credibility. What makes us, asking ourselves, what is my intent? And as we view the leaders that we are expected to put our cross next to, ask ourselves, what is the true intent behind that? And how is, what is the alignment and congruency between motives and behavior?
Yep.
Because often there is a disparity between how we are perceived, which is behavior based,
Yes.
and what our true intentions may be.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And drawing congruency around that. And then moving up to the element of capabilities. And, going back to what Nelson Mandela said, he said that everything starts with education. It's one of our greatest gifts.
Yes.
And the third element around our cause of credibility is capabilities. It's our skill, it's our talents, it's all of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But above all of that,
Yeah.
the fourth core of credibility is results. You cannot be a leader and not be responsible for results.
Yes.
You just can't.
Yes.
And we need to be asking ourselves those questions all the time. What is the track record that I'm seeing?
Yeah.
What can I place that promise on? Are there policies, are there procedures in place that can back what we're saying? Now, I'm not a politician. I have no intention of playing in the political field either.
Yeah.
What I can say, though, is that leadership is leadership. Regardless of whether you are leading a 5-person organization, a 50-person organization, or a country, or if you are leading yourself. And this brings me to the element around the 7 habits that you had the privilege of refreshing. I had the wonderful privilege of starting my journey with 7 habits nearly 20 years ago. And to this day, my children have 7 habits coming out of their ears. It's like, Mom, can we just be enough of your 7 habits? But here it is, right? We realize that those are such anchoring principles that exist. And because it's anchored in principles, regardless of whether you agree with it or not, it exists.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So from a leadership perspective, we're asking ourselves, what is in my control?
Yes.
What am I proactive about?
Yes.
And all of these habits are anchored in such universal, timeless principles that whether you are in the United States, like our good friend Anne, or whether you are here on this African continent, it matters, right? So it really is about that. And, leadership, as I engage with some of, really great thinkers, large blue chip organizations, and you listen to some of the incredible stories and where some of these leaders' thinking is, and you think like, wow, if only we can replicate that. Because, all organizations have pockets of excellence, right?
Yes.
How do we replicate that? How do we give those great principles to all people so that they know that when they lead self or lead others or lead organizations or lead an enterprise, it is anchored on a set of principles that endures. In other words, I get results today in an enduring way so that my results tomorrow is better than it was today. So it keeps building.
Hold that thought. Hold that thought, because I think as you're talking, I'm trying to now connect, all of this, what you are saying, and I mean, Melanie, and I'm thinking, Anne, I've got a follow-up probe for you. So, and I'm just going to say it, and it's really followed up by what Melanie has just covered. So let our choices reflect our fears.
Yeah,
Let our choices reflect our hopes and
I
not
hope
our
rather than
fears.
others. Yeah,
So
yeah.
talk to me about your journey of faith and healing and hope.
Yeah, that's a very profound, great question. And before I do, I do want to say to Marlinie, I didn't realize that Stephen Covey had met Mandela. What a special moment that you were part of that great meeting. And I also wanted to just reinforce what Marlinie's been saying, because when you look at the 7 habits, and by the way, I've been a great supporter of Stephen Covey's work for many years. He's had a profound impact on a number of countless people around the world. And when we look at so let me just pick up. So what I want to say is, if we look at the work of Covey, and if we think of Mandela's leadership, Mandela incorporated those 7 great habits, to a greater or lesser extent. He was not a saint, he was a sinner who kept on trying. But Marlinie, I just wanted to say how special that, that meeting happened, that you were part of that, and that, the blend of this work, I think, is so powerful. 7 habits are habits that are very much, important habits in how we exercise leadership.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to cover that. And by the way, I remember Phoenix very well, Marlinie. So, it was just further up that north coast when I used to travel up the coast and have a wonderful meal at some of those restaurants and places up there. So I remember that fondly. But Pam, let me come back to your question.
Yeah.
I think Marlinie touched on a very important thing around, courage and different elements of courage and intent.
Yeah.
And how do we align our thinking with our words and our actions? In our Mandela Blueprint around 45 moral courage, having solid, clear values, having being willing to show up in a vulnerable, authentic way.
Yeah.
Rugged resilience, transparent trust,
Yeah.
and what I call naked accountability are all critical ingredients in 45 moral courage.
Can you talk to us? I know we're going to get to the question that I asked. You just mentioned a term here that I think is very interesting. Can you just unpack it? Naked accountability.
Yeah. Well, when we talk, I think we have an accountability crisis in South Africa and in the world. I think it's a global issue.
Yeah.
I think that, what we see play out is that when people are in powerful positions, often there are 2 standards, 2-tier systems of justice.
Yeah.
If I think about, let me just give you a practical example. And, as a former top headhunter in that worked across Africa and a lot in South Africa, we have candidates who had been CEOs of large listed corporations, and something would go wrong, and there was wrongdoing, but there was a golden parachute.
Yeah.
So for the wrongdoing, and I have a particular example in mind. I won't mention the industry or anything because I don't want to do that. But, it was a large listed corporation. The CEO had lost his way. And for wrongdoing, he was paid 20 million rand to go off and had a non-disclosure agreement. Now, as a headhunter, my job is to understand, and it's not, people are innocent till proven guilty. So please let me also add that. But there are many examples, not only in South Africa. Look at the 2008 crash, in the US, and how, corporate chiefs on Wall Street walked away with bonuses. Nobody went to prison and walked away with bonuses when ordinary shareholders, little, families and kind of, right across, the country had lost a big portion of their fortune. And so, I think in the world, there is this different standard for people in power versus people who are not. And one, thing I want to say is that people confuse, which I did for many years,
Yeah.
people in powerful positions in leadership. Just because people have a powerful position, that does not make them a leader. That powerful position gives them authority,
Yeah.
and their duty and authority is to direct, protect, and maintain order.
Yeah.
Whether or not they exercise leadership is a separate question.
Yes.
And so I just want to draw that distinction, because I think people sitting in powerful positions with a lot of authority and a lot of resources at their disposal are often held to a different standard. So when I talk about naked accountability, I'm talking about this accountability crisis we have around the world. And I personally do not believe, and folks, let's go back to where we all began as kids and, our parents, where if we did something wrong, if our parents held us to account and there was a consequence, and there was a consistency to how they implemented that standard of behavior, if we do not, as parents, discipline our children in a loving way, but hold them to account, then we know we have problems. They carry on acting out. They get emboldened. Mom says, if you do this, you're going to be in trouble. You can't watch TV this week or whatever. And then mom goes, oh, well, okay, maybe you can this time. People get emboldened. So that alignment that Marlinie alluded to around what we think, what we say, and what we do is so critical. And I think that in the world, that if we want 45, we need people who, by the way, leadership is not a position, it's an action. We exercise leadership. And I think that if we want bold, courageous leadership, we have to exercise that leadership, in our own lives, because it begins with, and hold ourselves to account. But second, we need to hold our people that we've put in power and in office, we need to hold them to the same standards. And we need to ensure that there is a transparent accountability. These secrecy provisions in different parts of legislation, which are still in South Africa, secrecy provisions within the old, Banking Act, and yet the Constitution, which trumps those older pieces of legislation, the Constitution talks about that transparency. So, to Marlinie's point, how do you build trust? Well, you build trust when your thoughts, your words, your actions are aligned, your intent is with goodwill, not ill will, but also that you are transparent, not only about what you do well, but when you make a mistake. And when people have committed a wrongdoing, instead of this cover-up that happens, it happens in South Africa, it happens in other regulatory environments as well, where they think by covering up the truth, it's going to protect the system. The truth is that may work short-term, but medium and longer term, the truth prevails. And when the truth comes out, you lose the trust of your followers. You cannot exercise leadership in a way where people will truly be emboldened and empowered and inspired if you are covering up the truth. And ultimately, that truth will be told. That secrecy, that veil of secrecy will be lifted. And so when I talk about fortified moral courage, I absolutely believe that when people go to the polls at the end of this month, really delve deep into the character. To Marlinie's point, investigate how you can align what people have thought, said, and what they do, and whether they have really delivered in an honest, authentic way. So that's what I mean by naked accountability. But let me stop there.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think for contextualizing this, but I think I'll need you to then just answer. It's not a question, but it's just maybe give us,
Yeah.
some, inspiration around, I think I shared a Nelson Mandela quote that said, let our choices reflect our hopes and not our fears, right?
Yes.
And,
Yes.
in the context of your journey of faith, and I'll ask Melanie the similar type of question, because I know she's got a story around this. So your journey of hope, of faith, healing,
Yeah.
and hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me also add, under fortified moral courage in the 7
Yeah.
pillars, personal purpose
Yeah.
is one of those pillars of having fortified moral courage.
Yes.
Okay. And having purpose in the world is really around, what is my calling? What is the meaning of my life? What
Yeah.
impact do I want? Personally, from a young child, when I sat around those dinner tables with my parents talking about the politics of the day,
Yeah.
seeing some of the kind of very difficult scenes going on in South Africa, I think it really, at that stage, and I had some other very positive experiences as well.
Yeah.
But what I realized growing up in South Africa, there were those moments of despair, but I also had moments of great hope.
Yes.
Going with my mother to King Edward Hospital, spending Christmas holidays where she worked pro bono in a Ngutu Mission Hospital in Northern Natal, KwaZulu-Natal. Those were little ecosystems. That hospital was where I first experienced Ubuntu.
Yeah.
And so I think, I realized that in any one place in time, there is often this experience of despair, but there are these experiences that inspire hope. And that inspired my calling, which is really about helping to transform the leadership crisis worldwide, playing my tiny bit to do that. And having that purpose has been part of my fortified moral courage. So let me come back to my own journey. And Pam, you know this, I share this on LinkedIn.
Yes.
I have March the 21st last year, 2023, I came out of an endoscopy and my gastroenterologist had said to me I had a healing ulcer. I'd had a very difficult pain since August 2022. I'd been going to different doctors and there were really things. And I said, I know my body well.
Yes.
There is something more serious going on. And anyway, it took until March for different reasons. I won't go into that. But when I came out of that endoscopy, I was told I had a healing ulcer. Being a curious person, I said, Doc, can you show me, etc. He did. 3 days later, Friday the 24th, 3:30 p.m., the phone rang. And it was the same doctor who had subsequently retired, but I had permission to still communicate with him to try and kind of figure out, the feedback. And he said to me, Anne, you have cancer. And I said, what? Like in my head, I was thinking 3 days ago, you told me I had a healing ulcer. Today, you told me I have cancer. Anyway, it was very emotional. I actually, I cried. And then I kind of gathered myself and asked him some very practical questions. But you could tell, the man had retired. It was like, these results have gone to your oncologist. And by the way, in 2016 in South Africa, I had ovarian cancer and I finished chemo 2 weeks before I arrived at Harvard University. And that was a leap of faith because my oncologist at the time had recommended that I defer my fellowship. And Harvard had said that wasn't possible. And I needed to make a very quick decision because there were a whole lot of people wanting to get into this Global Advanced Leadership Initiative Fellowship. Okay. And it was a leap of faith. I thought, Mandela had personally said to me, this work of leadership is a powerful leverage we can use to change the world. And I just thought, you know what, Anne, you've got to seize the moment. It was a leap of faith that my chemo would actually work out. And my third chemo was delayed. But, my faith carried me through. And I finished chemo 2 weeks before I arrived at Harvard. But fast forward to 2023. I instinctively knew this time, it was a lot worse. And long story short, week 1, I was told I was stage 1. Week 2, they did more tests. They told me I was stage 2. Week 3, they did more tests. And they said I was stage 3. And I then went through pre-surgery chemo because it was stage 3. Stomach cancer had already burst through the stomach wall lining. And I then went into surgery, and post-surgery, I went up another stage. When you're very optimistic, beautiful, wonderful oncologist said he's disappointed, that's not good news. And I went up to stage 3C.
Yeah.
This is where my purpose and faith come in, Pam. And it's part of Mandela's Leadership Blueprint. I say to friends that Madiba is a gift that keeps on giving. In his blueprint, it's about a Mandela mindset. It's about, and the mindset, it's multiple intelligences, it's bigger and better thinking, multiple intelligences, and 45 moral courage. But let's start with mindset. I was in deep despair. After that phone call on Friday the 24th, Saturday morning, I woke up at 7. I walked along a beach at 7 o'clock in the morning. It was me, the oceans, the seagulls, and my higher power.
Sure.
And I cried. Yeah. I said, God, you have to let me live long enough to finish my work in this world. I was in despair. And I was in despair for some time. I cried a lot. I still get quite emotional about it. I wanted my mother. It's amazing how whatever age and stage we are in life, we still want others at those very difficult pivotal moments. And then I kind of thought, you've done all this work on Mandela's Blueprint. How do you shift from despair to hope to possibility? So I implemented Mandela's Leadership Blueprint. I looked at friends of mine shared examples of people who have stage 3 stomach cancer who have survived. There's a wonderful one of a chef who's got half a stomach. And even as a chef, he now creates wonderful recipes for people with half a stomach like myself. I have half a stomach now. And so there were those examples of hope. And let me say this, Pam, is that I say to people when we are dealing with despair and we need to shift to hope and possibility, we need a village. We need us. And we need to use those 10 multiple intelligences to create that window of hope, but also to put in place a plan of possibility. So I call hope the halfway house. I think that the moment friends shared those videos with me, suddenly I thought, gosh, here are these amazing people in the world who also were diagnosed with stage 3 stomach cancer. That gave me hope. Okay, there were empirical cases of hope. But hope is the halfway house. And coming back to the Mandela quote about our choices. So our choice then, my choice was, I want to live to finish and fulfill my purpose in life. That was my first choice. My second choice was kind of the people I surrounded myself with, the people in my village. I'm blessed with an amazing global village, people who shared uplifting stories, who shared these examples and videos of hope. So that was the second part of, here's my window of hope. The door is open, okay? But then I also looked at the 10 multiple intelligences. And another one of our co-founders, who is a South African who lives in the United States, is Dr. Sereni Pillay, who does a lot of work around this neuroscience. And Marlene, I think you'd be interested in his work and podcast too. But it's how hope is an aspiration, but possibility is a plan. We need to move from that aspiration and inspiration and take action one bold step at a time. So what I did was I researched prolifically around, I grew up in a medical family, but I also grew up in a family that believed in holistic health. And I did so much research around alternative therapies. And in the end, it's am I going only with modern medicine? Am I going with just alternate therapies, holistic healing? Or am I going to blend the two?
Yeah.
And my choice was to blend the two. So I went through all the chemo, the immunotherapy drugs, the surgery, the chemo post-surgery, etc. But I blended that and I took action. I researched, I worked out a diet that I felt would be good for me. to change my system from alkaline to acid. I work out. This morning I did an hour walk. I did 90 push-ups. I do 60. I do 30 on my fingertips for Madiba because he did them on his fingertips in his prison cell on Robben Island. So it's about physical intelligence. It's about social intelligence. It's about how do we show up with other people to create that, to build the loving relationships and connections in our village. Okay. It's cultural intelligence. It's how do I reach across these different cultures to respect and understand people who have different thoughts and beliefs around what could be part of my healing plan.
Yeah.
It's environmental intelligence. How do I show up and walk in nature and appreciate the environment and the blessing of this creation? And so coming back to that, I did that and I implemented all of that. But ultimately, when I feel low, and I do sometimes, I have those moments as part of it. First of all, I allow myself to grieve those losses of how my life was and how it is now. But it is my purpose which is fueled by my faith.
Yeah.
And it is that purpose to fulfill my calling in this world and to complete that, but centered in my faith, knowing that I have a higher power that is looking out for me, that has kind of created these incredible people in my life. I have a winning medical team. I have a global village. I have you two wonderful ladies in South Africa doing the work you do. That fills my heart with joy and makes me wake up in the morning feeling hopeful and knowing that, to quote Nelson Mandela, it always seems impossible until it is done.
And look at you now. You are cancer-free, am I right?
Well, let me say that. It is a step-by-step process.
Yeah.
And so I had a CAT scan on Monday last week. I had an endoscopy on Tuesday.
Yes.
I met my surgeon on Wednesday. And when I opened up my CAT scan, I saw results. They came back so quickly. And at 5:30, I'd been in for the CAT scan that morning. Before I opened up my portal, I took 3 deep breaths. Okay, Anne, say to yourself, you don't know what is in there.
Yeah.
And I opened up the portal and it said, no detection, no recurrence, no metastatic cancer. And I seldom do, but I sod. I gave thanks to my higher power, to my amazing medical team, and to this global village of people that inspire me and uplift me every single day. And it's a step-by-step process, Pam. So I have another CAT scan planned for 3 months' time. I have another one in 6 months' time. Anyone who's been on this journey of cancer knows that you just live each day as if it's your last, and you live in hope and possibility that you will fulfill whatever it is you're on this planet to achieve.
I don't know if I want to cry now or what, but, to our listeners, it's faith, healing, and hope. So if whatever challenge that you may be facing, just know that other people have seen worse. And faith, healing, and hope, and the higher power, and surround yourself with good people, right? Like-minded people. And when you feel like giving up, just know that giving up is not an option. Just keep going one day at a time. Thank you so much, Anne. Thank you so much. I can't even imagine, right, all sorts of emotions that you must have gone through and that you continue to go through, right? So this is what life is about. It's not all glitz and glam. This is about real people. This is about real experiences, So I'm going to hand over to Marlinie because you were not always this poised, I'm sure, right? Because life is a journey, right? So life has got ups and downs, So just pick from your journey of life, just really one profound experience, That when you look back at where you are today and you're like, really, I cannot believe that I went through that and I'm still standing, and how did you even overcome that challenge in your life at that particular time?
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Pam. I don't know whether you're just very smart or extremely intuitive. Because some of the things that I'm sharing, you and I have not talked about it before. And yet, in our differences, there's so much of similarity with what Anne is sharing and some of the questions that you're asking, like in this moment. And I'm thinking, well, Pam, I have not prepared for this. But there's just so much of similarities with what Anne is talking about as well. When I think about when I just started my journey, given all of where I've grown up and in my growing years, I remember days, coming from this place of Phoenix. I don't know if you...
I know.
Phoenix.
Yes. Yeah.
I would drive through the Umhlanga area, and you see all of these beautiful homes, and every home has a swimming pool, and you think like, wow, I want that, and why can't I? And I started to think about, well, how do I get that? What are the things that I need to... And as I was in school, I didn't have a big circle of friends. In fact, I was called a lot of names because I felt deep inside my core that I was poised for something more.
Yep.
I was called an ice cream and very many names, popsicles.
Ice cream. So now I've got an image of an ice cream stuck in my head.
And it is what it is. But here am I today. Why? And it aligns to both what Nelson Mandela has said and what we learn in Kavi's work. I am the product of my choices, not my circumstances. And there are very specific choices that I made along the way, going back to how did I start the Tolwyn Consulting business that eventually becomes the owner of Franklin CVY. I walked out of my job because my senior leader said to me, "You owe this company 19 hours," and I saw a bit of unfairness play in my journey in the various roles that I had. And I had one of two choices, right? I could say, because I'm this and I am who I am. I do what I do. And I'm not going to be sidelined because you have a specific view on how this world must operate. I can choose to get out. And so those are some of the choices that I had made. And I left. I remember I got into my car. I handed my resignation in. And I got into my car. And I drove and I called my husband. And I said, I left my job. And he says, okay. So I said, well, what do we do for money? And he said, we'll figure something out. And a few months later, being the entrepreneurial spirit that I am, I couldn't stay just being a housewife, which I loved doing, but it couldn't fulfill me. And I started the Tolwyn Consulting brand, but realize that there has to be something more out there. And a lot of people say to me, wow, you really do punch above your weight, don't you? And to that point, here I am, 20 years later, with, pushing this brand that really can make incredible impact on how people live, learn, love, how they operate every single day. Because I think back about, growing up in a home that came with its set of challenges. But my mom stayed. And I watch her, and as aging is an amazing thing.
Yeah.
And I feel sad sometimes when I look at my mom and I think she was the first woman in the community that could drive a car.
Yes.
She was the first woman in the community that got into all of these women's circles, and if somebody in the community had a medical problem, they'd run up to my mom because she could get into a car and she could drive, and she was the one who taught my dad to sign his name. So there's a lot of inspiration that I take from that. That as I do the work that I do, I recognize there's so much of greatness around us. I have such an incredible, supportive team around me. Whether I think about all of my administration staff in the office, I think about all of my amazing facilitators, and the accolades and the commentary that participants give as they engage with our work. And I think, how blessed am I to have stumbled upon this and made that decision to say, well, how do we grow this? How do we take it to, and not be selfish and hold it? It's not a secret to be held. It is a thing to be shared. And how do we do that so that we can have, more Mandelas in the world, more Kavis in the world, more great thinkers, more thinkers that suspend scarcity and uplift abundance. It's all of that. And that is what has allowed me to stand right here and know that whilst I stand here and might be the face and the voice of so many things that we do, I don't do anything by myself. In fact, I can't do anything by myself in the absence of all of those great thinkers behind me. All of the great work that people put behind me.
Because I think there's a lot of courage in that, just to build something and walk out of a job and say, look, what's next? Which is where I found myself last year, right? And I thought, okay, there has to be something more in life, but I don't know what it is. But all I know is that I want to talk about, the real challenges. I want to talk about, with all of the challenges in my over 20-year HR career, Anne and Melanie, and I think I've experienced so much hurt, but also so much joy as well, just in terms of the opportunities, that I've been afforded to, and the people that I've met along the journey. But, there was just always this unfulfilled space, right? There's that void that I've always had. And then I thought, look, you know what I mean? There has to be more to life than doing X and Y in the HR space, right? I said, let me go and find out what it is. But sometimes certain things and certain experiences that sometimes are hurtful, they happen to you, that actually push you into the space where you need to be, right? Because I'm thinking that had certain things not happened, I wouldn't be here today in the context of, I would never have probably met Anne, because I would have never put myself in a space where I'm on social media, I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm inviting all these people, I'm talking to them about diversity and what, which I'm not even a diversity guru, but it's something that I find fulfilling. Anne spoke about, and also you spoke about purpose, right? And I went out and I was like, let me go and find what my purpose is, because what I'm doing right now, I don't think it is what fulfills me. Not that there's anything wrong with the job, but maybe it's just certain experiences that pushed me that way to say, look, let me go and find my purpose, which then one of the guests that I've had in one of the episodes, he said, his name was Mr. Good News Karogan. He said, Pam, it's very important that if you want to inspire the young professionals, the young ones, and people from marginalized communities, you cannot show up as a, what did he say, Gerard? He said, you cannot show up as a walking wounded. You have to get yourself in a space where you show up as a victor versus a victim, right? So in that, you have to find a space of healing, right? And forgiving yourself and others, right? So that you are able then to move forward. So hence my question to you, Anne, was very specific around, the journey of faith, healing, and hope. Because what had happened is that I also had neglected my spirituality and faith, and I had to go back to that and go back to my faith and say, God, why am I here? How do I forgive X and how do I forgive me so that I can find a space to move forward? So I think really both your stories are so inspiring, and I feel very, very honored to have had you. I'm not even sure how we're doing for time, but I know that we just over an hour. Right. So, Anne, thank you so much. But let me come back to you. Your last words, right? So it is a very critical moment in our country, and you've shared a lot of wisdom already, right? But just one or two key takeaways for our listeners and our viewers.
What I would like to say in closing is that you're all called to lead. No matter where you are, in what station of life, anyone, anywhere, and anytime can exercise fortified moral courage and leadership excellence. And so you have this incredible opportunity in this beautiful country to make these big, bold choices that are informed, that are thoughtful, but that are bold in terms of not trying to find the quick fix, but understanding what will give sustainable long-term success, not only for you, but for the betterment of all South Africans. So, South Africa is an empirical case of hope for the world. South Africa has done it before, and when you exercise leadership with thoughtful, bold action, South Africa can do it again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Anne. Over to you, Marlinie. Last words, one or two.
So, leadership is a choice. It's not a position. What does that mean? As you take on your journey of leading self or leading others, lead boldly. Lead with a curious mind. Recognize that neurodiversity is a real thing. Build other leaders around you. As a leader, your number one job is to develop other leaders. Lift others as you rise. There is no need for you to put others down as you rise. Just allow yourself to make space for others. And just be powerful. Balance courage with consideration as you lead into the world. Make your mark, as small as it may be, or as gigantic as it may be. A mark is a mark, and it will be there, and people will recognize that. So, that's what I have to say.
Oh my, I am basking in leadership royalty. Let me say that again for the last time to Anne and Marlinie. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. And there's just so much work that still needs to be done. I am so really humbled and I'm so honored and I'm so blessed to have you in my network. I feel absolutely grateful. So thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been listening to or watching episode 14 of the Diversity Roundtable with the inspiring Anne Pratt, as well as the courageous Marlinie Ramsamy. And I'm your host, signing out, Pamela Xaba. Bye. Still my birthday month, by the way. It's May.